Is it possible that you could pray for someone and see them healed? Or is it possible that you could cast a demon out, or you could command something to right itself? A lot of Christians think it's possible, but they never see it happen. They kind of believe, but they don't believe at the same time. Well, we're going to talk about all of that in a minute, but let's read Luke chapter 9. Jesus called the 12 together and gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases. He sent them out to preach God's kingdom and to heal the sick. He said to them, "Take nothing for your journey, no staffs, nor wallet, nor bread, nor money. Don't have 2 coats each. Into whatever house you enter, stay there and depart from there. As many as don't receive you, when you depart from that city, shake off even the dust from your feet as a testimony against them." They departed and went through the villages, preaching the good news and healing everywhere. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard of all that was done by him and was very perplexed, because it was said by some that John had risen from the dead, and by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the old prophets had risen again. Herod said, "I beheaded John, but who is this about whom I hear such things?" He sought to see him. The apostles, when they had returned, told him what things they had done. He took them and withdrew apart to a desert region of a city called Bethsaida. But the multitudes, perceiving it, followed him. He welcomed them, spoke to them of God's kingdom, and cured those who needed healing. The day began to wear away, and the 12 came and said to him, "Send the multitude away, that they may go into the surrounding villages and farms and lodge and get food, for we are here in a deserted place." But he said to them, "You give them something to eat." They said, "We have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we should go and buy food for all these people," for there were about 5,000 men. He said to his disciples, "Make them sit down in groups of about 50 each." They did so and made them all sit down. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to the sky, he blessed them, broke them, and gave them to the disciples to set before the multitude. They ate and were all filled. They gathered up 12 baskets of broken pieces that were left over. As he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he asked them, "Who do the multitudes say that I am?" They answered, "John the Baptizer, but others say Elijah, and others that one of the old prophets has risen again." He said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "The Christ of God." He warned them and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, "The Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and be killed, and the 3rd day be raised up." He said to all, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever will lose his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits his own self? For whoever will be ashamed of me and my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed, when he comes in his glory, and the glory of his Father, and of the holy angels. But I tell you the truth, there are some of those who stand here who will in no way taste of death until they see God's kingdom." About 8 days after these sayings, he took with them Peter, John, and James, and went up onto the mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became white and dazzling. Behold, 2 men were talking with him, who were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, but when they were fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. As they were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let's make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he said these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered into the cloud. A voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." When the voice came, Jesus was found alone. They were silent and told no one in those days of the things which they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great multitude met them. Behold, a man from the crowd called out, saying, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only child. Behold, a spirit takes him, he suddenly cries out, and it convulses him, so that he foams, and it hardly departs from him, bruising him severely. I begged your disciples to cast it out, and they couldn't. Jesus answered, Faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here. While he was still coming, the demon threw him down and convulsed him violently. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. They were all astonished at the majesty of God. But while all were marveling at all the things which Jesus did, he said to his disciples, Let these words sink into your ears. For the Son of Man will be delivered up into the hands of men. But they didn't understand this saying. It was concealed from them that they should not perceive it, and they were afraid to ask him about this saying. An argument arose among them about which of them was the greatest. Jesus, perceiving the reasoning of their hearts, took a little child and set him beside his side, and said to him, Whoever receives this little child in my name receives me. Whoever receives me receives him who sent me. For whoever is least among you, this one will be great. John answered, Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him, because he doesn't follow with us. Jesus said to him, Don't forbid him, for he who is not against us is for us. It came to pass when the days were near that he should be taken up, he intently set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers before his face. They went and entered into a village of the Samaritans so as to prepare for him. They didn't receive him because he was travelling with his face toward Jerusalem. When his disciples James and John saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from the sky and destroy them, just as Elijah did? But he turned and rebuked them. You don't know of what kind of spirit you are. For the Son of Man didn't come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. They went to another village. As they went on their way, a certain man said to him, I want to follow you wherever you go, Lord. Jesus said to him, The foxes have holes, and the birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He said to another, Follow me. But he said, Lord, allow me first to go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, Leave the dead to bury their own dead, but you go and announce God's kingdom. Another also said, I want to follow you, Lord, but first allow me to say goodbye to those who are at my house. Jesus said to him, No one having put his hand to the plough and looking back is fit for God's kingdom. Each and every chapter has so much in it. So we are skipping a lot in my very few and brief comments. When I go through the Bible a second time, there'll be a video on each and every one of these things. And that's why the second time through is going to take 20 years. And so it may be a while before I get back to Luke. But in this chapter, there's really two things I just want to mention. The first is that it starts out by Jesus calling the 12. He gives them power and authority over demons and to cure diseases and sends them out. They go out, and it says in verse 6, they departed and went through all the villages preaching the good news and healing everywhere. So they're just doing the same things that Jesus does, and it confuses Herod because he thinks, has John the Baptist come back alive? So Jesus is training these disciples of his in, you could say, in faith and ministry. Later on, of course, when Jesus goes back to heaven, these 12 disciples and others are left behind, and they go through all the world preaching the gospel, and so they are just doing what Jesus does. Jesus teaches them to do it, and they do it. Now, if you were in their place, would you have done the same things? Yes, you would have. That's the whole point of them being with Jesus, is they're learning on the job. And but you notice, if you've paid close attention as we've gone through all the Bible stories, there's plenty of times when he rebukes them for their lack of faith. So faith is one of these things where it's not obvious exactly how it works. It has to click with you. But once it clicks with you, it's very easy. Even the 12 disciples could go out and do it. If you have prayed for people and not had any results, it's probably because you're not thinking about faith in the right type of way, and you're trying to bring the result about, which of course you can't do. You can't bring about any result at all. I remember listening to Todd White. I haven't heard much of Todd White, but I've heard one or two of his sermons, and remember him saying that he prayed for something like 600 people before he saw a healing. And of course now he sees them all the time. And it took about 600 goes for it to click. Well, these disciples are with Jesus for up to 3 years. It takes them a while for it to click, but there's something clicks in the way they perceive, the way they understand how it works. Once it clicks with you, it's easy. It doesn't mean that you're. It doesn't mean that them. Let me show you two other things that happen in this chapter, which are really, really interesting. So one is, they do all these things. The word spreads. Huge crowds are gathering. They're in Bethsaida. A huge crowd turns up, and Jesus goes to feed the 5,000. Jesus says to them in verse 13, "You give them something to eat." Now, if they were thinking the same way as Jesus, they could have fed the 5,000. But they don't. They're thinking like people. They start thinking, well, where can we get food from? The shops are not nearby. Their brains don't think the same as Jesus. They immediately go to think like normal people do. So even though just a few verses earlier they've gone all over the place preaching and healing many, they still don't think like Jesus. Later on in this chapter, however, they're walking on the way to Jerusalem. There's a revelation. Peter realizes Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus says to them, "I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to die and be raised up." Jesus is transfigured on the mountain. They see Moses and Elijah. Then Jesus sets his face to Jerusalem. He's on his way to Jerusalem. It says they're going through some Samaritan towns, and they were not welcomed. There were various ways you could walk to Jerusalem. Like if you were up near Nazareth, up in the area where Jesus lived, or up in Capernaum where Jesus stationed his ministry, the normal way would be to go across to the Jordan River and walk down the Jordan to Jericho and walk up. That's the normal way. But the last time that Jesus goes to Jerusalem, it says they went through some Samaritan villages, which means they went a different way. They walked through kind of like all the mountainous region in the middle. Instead of going down to the flat area near the river, they're walking through the mountains. And the Samaritans don't receive them because it says they were traveling toward Jerusalem. Remember, Samaritans and Israelites don't like each other. That's why Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, and we're going to get to it in a few chapters. I'm looking forward to it. It's called the Good Samaritan because they didn't think there were any good ones. And so they're going through Samaria, and these people don't receive Jesus. And the disciples say, in verse 54, when his disciples James and John saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from the sky and destroy them, just as Elijah did?" But he rebuked them and says, "You don't know what type of spirit you are. The Son of Man didn't come to destroy men's lives, but to save them." The thing that astounds me about that is they clearly believed if they just spoke a word, fire would come down from heaven and destroy those villages. They were filled with faith that they could speak a word and destroy people. That is an amazing thing. So they've been with Jesus. At the start of this chapter, they go out, they heal all over the place. In theory, they could have fed the 5,000, but they just didn't think of it because they are limited by human thinking. But here they think of something that's completely out of our usual realm of thinking. I could call down fire, just like Elijah. Jesus rebukes them. Jesus, it's like he doesn't even say anything about the faith aspect's just a given. They could do that if they want, but don't do that. I've come to save lives. These passages make me realize that healing people is easy. Praying for people is easy. Casting out demons is easy. In theory, calling down fire from heaven is also easy. The limitation is in the way we think. And there are two problems in the way we think. One, we think like people. So there are plenty of occasions when we might do something for God if only we thought we could. But we don't, because we just think too much like humans. But then when we do realize we could do something for God, our faith is hamstrung because we think about faith in a human way rather than thinking about it in God's way. The reason it's easy is because He does it, not you. And so there's something about the fact that you're just authorizing a miracle, you're not making the miracle happen. And it's kind of like where your mum knows the recipe and she makes the recipe with all the ingredients and puts it in the microwave, and all you've got to do is press the start button. Something like that. And so I think there's a journey for us to have, and I've actually been on this journey for some time of like discovering how easy it is to heal people. And I know it's easy intellectually, and I've experienced how easy it is some of the time, but there's been other times I've gone to pray for people and I've really struggled. And so it's a journey. And I would invite you to join me on this journey of finding out how easy it is to see your prayers get answered in miraculous ways. In fact, why don't you start right now praying for a situation that needs a miracle, but rather than striving to get your prayer heard, just believe God hears it. And rather than striving for it to be a good prayer so that it convinces God, just believe that it convinces Him. And rather than striving so that it's somehow your prayer is what makes it happen, just ask God to do it and see what happens. Father, I want to thank you for Luke chapter 9 and how easily your disciples back then were able to have healings and miracles and answers to prayer. And Lord, give us the same grace that we might too, with great ease, see miracles at work through our prayers and through our faith. In Jesus' name, amen.